She told herself it was just one night, a transaction, a sacrifice any mother would make to save her child. But the moment Marcus Steele closed the hotel room door behind them and looked at her, not like a man who had purchased her time, but like a man who had been waiting his whole life for her to walk into it, Naomi realized she had made a terrible miscalculation. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Thank you for choosing to be here out of everywhere you could be on the internet right now. That genuinely means a lot. And let's get into this story. Naomi Carter was 34 years old, and she had learned the hard way that life did not negotiate. It took. It demanded. It showed up at your door at 2 a.m. with a medical bill carrying too many zeros and a doctor's voice still ringing in your ears saying words like critical and without intervention, and we cannot wait much longer. It did all of that without apology, and it expected you to figure it out. So that was what Naomi did. She figured it out. Her daughter, Zoe, was 7 years old, small for her age with big brown eyes that took up most of her face and a laugh that could fill a room twice her size. Zoe had been diagnosed with a rare cardiac condition 4 months earlier, the kind that required a surgical procedure performed by only a handful of specialists in the country, the kind that insurance called elective even when the alternative was a funeral, the kind that cost $87,000, and Naomi, who worked as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in Atlanta, did not have $87,000. She had $900 in savings, a used Honda that needed new brakes, and a mother who loved her but was living on a fixed income in Savannah. She had exhausted every option she could think of. Fundraising pages that raised $4,000 after 2 months. A bank loan she was denied because her debt-to-income ratio was too high. Grant applications that moved at the pace of bureaucracy, while Zoe's condition did not wait. And then a colleague named Priya had mentioned a name, quietly, over lunch. The way people mention things they are not sure they should be saying. Marcus Steele. He was known in Atlanta's upper circles, the kind of man who existed in a world Naomi only glimpsed through the glass of the law firm's conference room windows when their corporate clients came in wearing suits that cost more than her rent. He was 39, the founder of Steele Capital Group, a private investment firm that had made him wealthy enough that wealthy was no longer the right word. He was also known, Priya said carefully, for being a man who helped people, quietly, discreetly, under terms that were negotiated like any other business arrangement. Naomi had sat with that information for 3 weeks. Before she did anything with it, she had gone home and held Zoe while she slept and told herself there had to be another way. She applied for 2 more grants. She called the hospital billing department 4 more times. She priced out medical loans from 3 different lenders and watched the interest rates laugh at her. And then one evening Zoe had an episode in the bathtub, a sudden alarming irregularity that sent Naomi to the emergency room at 11 at night with wet hands and a terror so cold it lived in her chest like a stone. And the doctor on call had looked at her with the particular exhaustion of someone delivering a message they had delivered too many times and told her that Zoe needed that surgery within 60 days. Naomi called Priya the next morning. The meeting was arranged through an intermediary, a woman named Sandra, who was professional and calm and explained the arrangement in language that was careful and precise, designed, Naomi suspected, to make it easy to say yes. Marcus Steele would cover the full cost of the surgery plus post-operative care. In return, Naomi would spend 1 evening with him. Dinner and whatever followed, Sandra said, at his discretion, conducted with complete privacy and absolute discretion on both sides. There was a document, brief and legally clean, that Naomi signed with a hand that did not shake because she had decided it would not shake. She was a paralegal. She read the document 4 times. It was exactly what it said it was. She told herself she was not the first woman to make a hard choice. She told herself this was a transaction, nothing more. She chose her dress carefully. A deep burgundy-wrapped dress that was elegant without being desperate, and she did her hair and her makeup with the focused precision of someone preparing for battle, and she took a car to the Harlow Hotel on Peachtree Street and told herself the whole way there that she was just a woman keeping her daughter alive. The lobby of the Harlow was the kind of quiet that money bought, not silent. There was soft music, the murmur of conversation, the clean click of heels on marble, but insulated, buffered from the world outside in a way that felt deliberate. Sandra had given her a key card and a suite number. Naomi rode the elevator to the 14th floor and stood in the hallway for exactly 40 seconds, her hand against the wall, breathing. Then she walked to the door and knocked. He opened it himself. She had expected staff, or at least the kind of polished remove that wealthy men use as armor. She had not expected Marcus Steele to open his own door in dark trousers and a white dress shirt with the collar open, holding a glass of water like he had been standing somewhere nearby and simply walked over and to look at her the way he did. Not like a transaction, like recognition. He was taller than she had expected, broad through the shoulders, with a face that was angular and unhurried, dark brown skin, close-cut hair with a trace of gray at the temples that did nothing to age him and everything to make him look like a man who had earned something. His eyes were the color of dark amber, and they moved over her once, not with the crude inventory she had braced for, but with something that felt uncomfortably like attention. Real attention. The kind that noticed. "Naomi," he said, just her name, low and even, like he had said it before somewhere private. "Mr. Steele?" she said, because she needed the formality like a hand on a railing. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Marcus," he said, and stepped back to let her in. The suite was enormous and understated, the kind of room that did not need to perform its own luxury. There was a dining table set for two near the window, candles lit, food already covered and waiting. There was a bar cart, a sitting area, and beyond an open doorway, the suggestion of a bedroom that Naomi did not look at directly. She walked to the center of the room and stood with her clutch in both hands and reminded herself who she was. She was Naomi Carter. She had raised a child, alone. She was not afraid of a room. "Sit down," Marcus said, and his voice carried something she didn't expect. A gentleness that had no business being in this arrangement. "We should eat first. I had the kitchen send up from Aria. I don't know your preferences, so I ordered broadly. I hope that's all right." She looked at him. "You're trying to make me comfortable." "Yes," he said simply, pulling out a chair. No apology for it. No performance. Just the plain fact of it, offered without explanation. She sat down because what else did you do with a man who told the truth that cleanly? The food was extraordinary. Sea bass and roasted vegetables and a bread that Naomi ate 2 pieces of because she had been too nervous to eat all day, and her body had now decided it was done cooperating with her anxiety. Marcus ate across from her and asked her questions that were not the questions she had prepared for. He didn't ask about the arrangement or the money or what she did in her spare time like a man filling a questionnaire. He asked about her work, and when she told him she was a paralegal, he asked which area of law, and then actually listened when she explained the corporate contract side of it, and he asked a follow-up question that was specific enough to tell her he had processed what she said and not just waited for his turn to speak. She watched him across the table and felt something shift in her chest that she did not want shifted. "You're not what I expected," she said before she could stop herself. He looked up from his plate. "What did you expect?" She was quiet for a moment. "Someone who needed to buy this." The words landed between them, honest and a little sharp, and she watched him receive them without flinching. He set his fork down and looked at her with those amber eyes, steady and direct, and said, "That's a fair thing to say." "Is it true?" she asked. He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was choosing his words rather than manufacturing them. "No," he said finally. "It's not a need. It's a choice, the same as yours." "My choice? It was made under duress," she said. "I know," he said, "which is why the money is already transferred. It went through this afternoon. The surgery is fully funded regardless of anything else that happens tonight." "That's not conditional?" Naomi went very still. She stared at him. "What?" "The funds are in the hospital's account. Your daughter's procedure is scheduled. Sandra confirmed it at 4 o'clock. He picked up his wine glass with the ease of a man who had just said something completely normal. "I wanted you to know before dinner, not after." She didn't speak for a long moment. Her throat had done something complicated, and she was not going to cry at this man's dinner table. She absolutely was not. "Why would you do that?" she said, and her voice came out quieter than she meant it to. "Because I didn't want you to spend the evening calculating," he said. "I wanted you here, not performing, not surviving, just here." Naomi set her fork down very carefully. She looked at Marcus Steele across the candlelit table in this quiet and expensive room, and felt the floor of the arrangement she had walked in with tilt beneath her. Because this was not what she had prepared for. She had prepared for transaction, for something she could get through and then pack away and never look at again. She had not prepared for a man who freed her from the debt before the night even started, and then asked nothing in return but her actual presence. That was so much more dangerous than the alternative. You should know, she said slowly, that this changes things. How? He asked. Because it's now I don't know what I'm doing here, she said. If it's not an obligation, then I don't know what it is. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he said, maybe that's the better place to start. They finished dinner. They moved to the sitting area and Marcus poured her a small glass of something warm and amber that she sipped slowly while the city moved far below the window. He asked about Zoe, not about the surgery or the diagnosis or the logistics. He asked what she was like, what made her laugh, what she was afraid of, and Naomi found herself talking about her daughter the way she never got to talk about her. Not the patient or the case number or the recipient of other people's charity, but Zoe, who was obsessed with frogs and had named every stuffed animal she owned after a different U.S. president and who sang made-up songs while she brushed her teeth, and who had 3 weeks ago told Naomi very seriously that when she grew up she wanted to be a marine biologist and also a chef, and also maybe a dentist, just in case. Marcus laughed at that. A real laugh, low and warm, that rearranged something in the room. And Naomi felt herself smile. Actually smile. Not the careful, managed expression she had worn since she walked in, but the real one. The one that reached her eyes, and she watched Marcus watch it happen and go very still in a way that made her breath catch. She sounds extraordinary, he said. She is, Naomi said. She is the most extraordinary person I have ever known, and she is 7 years old, and she deserves to grow up. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just enough, and Marcus didn't move toward her, or offer platitudes or perform sympathy. He just looked at her with those steady eyes and said, she will. 2 words, said like a fact, and Naomi believed them. The evening moved the way evenings do when you stop watching the clock. They talked about other things. His work, which he described with a dry humor that suggested he found the theater of wealth more amusing than impressive. He had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, the son of a high school history teacher and a woman who ran a catering business out of their home kitchen. He had gotten a scholarship to Morehouse, then an MBA from Wharton, and then spent 12 years building something that had exceeded anything he had planned for. He said that last part without vanity, as a man recounting geography, rather than bragging about a destination. Do you like it? She asked. What you've built? He considered this. I like what it makes possible, he said. The thing itself, the company, the capital, the meetings, that's just machinery. I like what the machinery produces. Like tonight? She asked, and immediately felt exposed for asking. But he didn't deflect. He looked at her directly and said yes. Like tonight? The tension between them had been building all evening the way a storm builds. Not with drama, but with a slow atmospheric shift, the kind you feel in your skin before you see it in the sky. Every time he looked at her, she was aware of it. Every time their conversation moved close to something real, something personal, she felt it tighten. He had not touched her, not once. Not a hand at the small of her back guiding her through the suite, not a brush of fingers passing her a glass, and somehow the absence of touch made her more aware of it than any contact could have. She set her glass down and looked at him. Marcus, she said. Naomi, he said back, the same way he had said it at the door, like her name was a complete sentence. I came here, thinking I knew exactly what this was, she said. And now? He asked. She looked at him across the small distance of the sitting area. The low light catching the lines of his face, his hands relaxed on his knees, that particular stillness he carried like a man who had learned not to reach for things too quickly. She thought about Zoe. She thought about the document she had signed. She thought about the fact that the money was already in the hospital's account and this man owed her nothing and she owed him nothing. And they were 2 people in a room who had started the evening as a transaction and somewhere over sea bass and stories about a 7-year-old who wanted to be a dentist, chef, marine biologist had become something else entirely. Now I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm not afraid. He stood slowly, unhurried, and crossed the small distance between them and stood in front of her. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him, close enough to smell the faint cedar and clean cotton of him, and he looked down at her with those amber eyes and lifted one hand and very slowly, very deliberately, tucked a single loose curl behind her ear. His fingertips grazed her cheek in the process. barely the softest possible contact, and her breath left her body like something pulled. "You don't have to be here," he said quietly. "Not because of the money, not because of anything. If you want to leave, you leave. No consequence." "I know," she whispered. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. She looked up at him. At this man she had met 3 hours ago who had handed her daughter's life back to her before asking for a single thing, who had listened to her and laughed with her and looked at her like she was a person and not a problem to be managed. She looked at the careful, controlled wanting in his face, the way he held himself back even now, even standing this close, because he was the kind of man who asked. "No," she said. He kissed her then, slowly, one hand cupping her jaw with a gentleness that contradicted the heat behind it, tilting her face up to his, and the kiss was not tentative, it was certain, deep, and so unhurried it felt like he had decided to learn her by it, like this was not a moment to rush through, but to inhabit fully. She felt the warmth of it move through her chest and down into her hands, and she reached up and gripped the front of his shirt because her body needed something to hold on to, and he made a low sound against her mouth and pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her like he had been thinking about exactly how she would fit there, and she fit exactly right. When they finally broke apart, she was breathing unevenly, and his forehead rested against hers, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. "I did not expect you," he said quietly, like the confession cost him something. "I didn't expect you either," she said. What followed was not the transaction Naomi had steeled herself for. It was not performance or endurance or something she filed away in a sealed compartment. It was two people choosing each other in a room where choosing felt enormous and real, where every touch was deliberate and every moment between them was weighted with all the things they hadn't said and hadn't expected to feel. He was attentive in a way that undid her. The way he watched her face and the way he moved like the only thing that mattered was that she was present, truly present, and not somewhere else surviving. He made her feel seen in a way that was almost unbearable in its intensity. She gave herself over to it without the armor she had walked in wearing, and somewhere in the small hours of that night, in that quiet, expensive room above the city, Naomi Carter let herself be held by a man who held her like he meant it. She lay awake after, in the dark, listening to his steady breathing beside her. She stared at the ceiling and told herself this was where it ended. One night. That had been the agreement. She would leave in the morning, Zoe would have her surgery, and Marcus Steele would return to the life that existed in the stratosphere above hers. Clean. Finished. A line drawn. She told herself that until she almost believed it. She was dressed and had her clutch in her hand by 5:30 in the morning, standing in the sitting room in the gray early light. She looked toward the bedroom once. Then she wrote her number on the hotel notepad, because she was not a woman who pretended things hadn't happened, and left it on the table and walked out. She told herself it was over. Marcus Steele did not behave like a man who understood that it was over. He texted her that evening, nothing elaborate. Just, "I hope you slept." She stared at it for 10 minutes. Then she typed back, "I did. Thank you," and then she put her phone face down and went to help Zoe with her homework and did not think about him. She thought about him constantly. He texted again the next day. Not anything that could be called pursuit. Nothing that pressured or demanded, just small things, the kind of text that opened doors without requiring her to walk through them. He sent her an article about a legal case she had mentioned at dinner. He texted once to say that Zoe's surgery team had an excellent success rate with her specific condition, and he had looked into it specifically because he wanted her to have that information. That one made Naomi put the phone down and press both hands flat on the kitchen counter and breathe. On the 5th day, she called him instead of texting back. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Naomi." "You looked into Zoe's surgical team," she said. "Yes," he said. "Why?" she asked. There was a pause. Then, "Because I couldn't stop thinking about her." Naomi gripped the phone. "About her," she repeated. "About both of you," he said quietly. She closed her eyes. She had built very careful walls around the events of that night, had categorized it and sealed it and told herself it was a transaction she had survived and moved on from, and here was this man on the other end of the phone dismantling her categorization with 5 words and the particular honesty of someone who was also trying to keep things contained and failing at it. "Marcus?" she said. We had an agreement." "We did," he said. "I honored it completely. Everything I agreed to is done." "Then why are you still calling?" Another pause. Longer. "Because that's separate," he said. She didn't know what to say to that. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I'm not leveraging anything. You owe me nothing, Naomi, and I think you know that. I would like to see you again, if that's something you want." She stood in her kitchen in the quiet of Zoe's bedtime, in her life that was full and exhausted and currently held together by the relief that her daughter's surgery was in 12 days, and she thought about a man who had opened his door without ceremony and fed her Aria's sea bass and said the money was transferred before she sat down. She thought about his hands and his mouth and the way he had held her like she mattered. She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. "Coffee," she said finally. "Not dinner. Coffee. Somewhere public." She could hear something release in him through the phone. "Tomorrow morning?" he said. "Tomorrow morning," she said, and hung up before she could change her mind. They met at a place in Inman Park that Naomi had chosen specifically because it was her territory, small and neighborhood familiar, where she knew the barista by name and the back corner table was always open on weekday mornings. She arrived first on purpose, watched Marcus walk in. Dark jeans, a charcoal jacket, no performance of wealth, just a man looking for her in a coffee shop, and watched him see her, and the small, contained way his whole face changed. He sat across from her. They ordered coffee, and for 2 hours they talked the way people talk when they are not performing for each other, when the circumstances have already stripped away the usual social negotiation and left something raw and more honest underneath. He told her about his marriage, brief, early, to a woman named Camille, who had been brilliant and driven and fundamentally incompatible with the man Marcus had been trying to become at 29. No cruelty in the telling, just the clear-eyed account of two people who had wanted different things and taken too long to admit it. He had been single for 6 years. He dated occasionally, he said, but nothing that lasted past the point where it would have needed to become real. "Why not?" Naomi asked. He looked at her over his coffee cup. "Because real requires something I hadn't been willing to give," he said. She absorbed that. "And now?" He was quiet for a moment. "Something changed," he said simply, and looked at her in a way that made the words something completely unnecessary. Naomi told him about Deshawn, her ex-husband, Zoe's father, who had been charming and present and then gradually, and then suddenly, not. Who had left when Zoe was two, not with or drama or confrontation, but with a slow withdrawal that had ended with divorce papers and a custody arrangement he honored reliably enough to be called decent, and nothing more. She had grieved that marriage not with anger but with a quiet exhaustion, and what she had taken from it was a very precise understanding of her own tolerance for disappointment. "I don't take risks anymore," she told Marcus. "Not personal ones. I calculated everything. I keep things manageable." "And yet," he said. She looked at him. "And yet," she agreed. Zoe's surgery was on a Tuesday. Naomi sat in the waiting room at Piedmont, Atlanta for 6 hours and 40 minutes, and Marcus showed up at hour 2 with coffee and a paper bag from the bakery near her office that she had mentioned once, in passing, at the coffee shop. He sat beside her and didn't say much. He didn't try to fill the silence with comfort-shaped words. He just sat there, solid and present. And when Naomi's hands started shaking somewhere around hour 5, he reached over and covered both of them with one of his, and she let him and didn't say a word. The surgeon came out and said the procedure had gone beautifully, that Zoe was in recovery and would be awake within the hour, and that all indications were excellent. Naomi put her face in her hands and made a sound that was not crying and was absolutely crying, and Marcus put his arm around her and she turned into his shoulder and let herself fall apart for exactly 4 minutes, which was as long as she allowed herself, and he held her through all 4 of them without shifting or pulling away or doing anything except being there with the complete and certain steadiness of someone who had decided that her falling apart was something he was honored to witness. She pulled back and pressed the heels of her hands under her eyes and said, "I look terrible." "You look like a mother whose daughter just made it," he said. She looked at him. This man, this entirely unexpected man. "Marcus," she said. "I know," he said quietly, and somehow, he did. She let him come back the next day, and the day after that. He came to the hospital during visiting hours and sat with Zoe, who regarded him with the complete, unfiltered assessment that only children are capable of, studied him for approximately 90 seconds, and then asked him whether he thought frogs were better than fish. He said that was a complex question, and he would need more information to answer properly. Zoe found this deeply satisfying and proceeded to give him 45 minutes of information. Marcus listened to every word. Naomi watched from the doorway of Zoe's hospital room. Her daughter in the adjustable bed with her frog-stuffed animal. This man in a chair pulled close, bent forward with his elbows on his knees and his full attention on a 7-year-old explaining the difference between tree frogs and poison dart frogs, and felt something open in her chest that she had kept closed for a very long time. It terrified her. She walked back into the hallway and stood against the wall and breathed through it. Priya found her there, coming off the elevator with flowers and a balloon. She stopped and looked at Naomi's face and said, "Oh no." "Oh no" is correct, Naomi said. "You like him," Priya said. "I need you to not say it like that," Naomi said. "How would you like me to say it?" Naomi pressed her lips together. "It doesn't matter how I say it because it's still the same impossible thing." Priya sat down on the hallway bench and looked at her friend. "Why is it impossible?" "Because of how it started," Naomi said. "Because of what I did to get here. Because when you strip away the surgery and the money and the arrangement, I don't know what's left. I don't know if what I feel is real or if it's gratitude that I can't tell apart from something else." "Does it feel like gratitude?" Priya asked. Naomi was quiet. "Does he feel like gratitude?" Priya pressed. Naomi leaned her head back against the wall. "No," she said quietly. "He feels like trouble." Priya smiled. "The good kind?" "I don't know yet." Zoe came home on a Friday. She spent the first weekend on the couch watching nature documentaries and bossing Naomi around with the cheerful authority of a child who has correctly identified that the adults will do anything she asks. Marcus sent a gift. A book about amphibians of North America, hardcover with a note inside that said, "For the world's foremost frog expert." Naomi read it twice. She put it on the kitchen counter and looked at it all weekend. She called him Sunday evening. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask," he said. "Why me?" she said. "You could have any woman in Atlanta, in the country, women who come without the complications, without the history of how we started. Why are you spending your Tuesdays in a hospital chair talking to a 7-year-old about amphibians?" There was a long pause. Long enough that she thought she had finally asked the question that would make him step back, retreat into the comfortable distance that wealthy men maintain so effortlessly. Instead, he said, "Can I come over?" She said yes before she thought about whether she should. He arrived 40 minutes later with takeout containers from a Thai place on Ponce and a bottle of sparkling water, and the same unhurried way he had of entering a space, like he was not claiming it, but becoming part of it. Zoe was already asleep. The apartment was quiet. Naomi had changed into leggings and an oversized Atlanta University sweatshirt, and she answered the door in it and watched him take in the sweatshirt and the bare feet and the complete absence of the carefully composed woman he had first met, and watched his expression do something warm and complicated. They ate on the couch with the television off. He was quiet for a while, and Naomi let him be, because she had learned that Marcus's silences were not empty. They were full, and he came out of them with something worth waiting for. "My father died 2 years ago," he said finally. She looked at him. "Heart attack. He was 62. He was healthy. Walked every morning, didn't smoke, watched what he ate, just gone. And I spent 6 months after that very aware of how I was spending my time, what I was building it for, whether the machinery, as I called it, was connected to anything that actually mattered." He looked at his food, the arrangement, what I do with Sandra, the help I offer. It started after he died. It was his way of thinking, not mine. He was a man who believed you had an obligation to use what you had. That excess without purpose was a kind of poverty. Naomi was very still. "I've met a lot of people through that process," he said. "People in hard situations who needed a bridge. I respected all of them, but I had never—" He stopped, looked at her. "I had never sat down to dinner with someone and felt like the evening was happening to me, like I was the one being changed by it." Naomi set her food down. "You asked why you," he said. "It's not a calculation, Naomi. It's not charity or habit or the arrangement. It's you. Specifically, exactly you. The way you held yourself in that hotel room like you were walking into war, and the way you laughed about Zoe's dentist plan, and the way you called Priya from a hallway and thought I couldn't hear you say, 'I don't know if it's real.'" He paused. It's real for me. It's been real since the moment you walked in and looked at me like I was something to get through, and I thought, I want to be something else to her. Naomi looked at him for a long time. The lamplight was low and the apartment was quiet, and somewhere down the hall, Zoe was sleeping with the frog book on her nightstand, and this man was sitting on her couch telling her the truth, with the particular vulnerability of someone who did not perform it. She reached out and took his hand. Just that. His hand in both of hers, the way he had taken hers in the hospital waiting room, and she felt him go still. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "I want you to know that." "I know," he said. "And I think you're worth being scared for," she said. His thumb moved across her knuckles. That gentle, deliberate touch. "I'll try to justify that," he said quietly. She leaned in and kissed him there on her couch in her apartment in her sweatshirt, and it was different from the hotel. Less combustible, more settled, the kiss of two people who had decided rather than surrendered. He cupped her face and kissed her back slowly, thoroughly, like they had time, like neither of them was going anywhere. They did, after all, but the trouble Naomi had sensed was not the kind that came from falling for the wrong man. It came from a different direction, and it arrived 3 weeks later in the form of a woman named Giselle Harmon. Giselle was 41, stunning in the way that people who have spent a long time weaponizing their beauty become stunning. Sharp and deliberate, with an Instagram following that corporate brands paid well for, and a history with Marcus that Sandra, in a phone call Naomi overheard by accident, referred to as complicated. She had apparently seen Naomi and Marcus at dinner the previous weekend at a restaurant in Buckhead where they had gone on their first real public date. Naomi in a black dress that made Marcus look at her like she'd pulled the floor out from under him, and had apparently taken exception to what she saw. Naomi found out about Giselle the way women always found out about the women who resented their happiness, through a phone screen in a coffee shop while her friend Tamara pushed her phone across the table without a word. It was a post, not explicit, not legally actionable, but precise in the way cruelty is precise when it knows exactly what it's doing. A photograph of Naomi taken on the street. She didn't know when, didn't know by whom, with a caption that was worded just ambiguously enough to imply, without stating it, that Naomi was a woman who had come to Marcus's attention through transactional means, that she was not what she appeared, that Marcus deserved to know the company he was keeping. The post had 4,000 likes. It had been up for 6 hours. Naomi set the phone down very carefully. She looked at Tamara, who was watching her with the particular ferocity of a woman who loved her friend and was waiting to be told what to do with it. "Don't," Naomi said. "Nay." "Don't," she said again, very quietly. "I need a minute." She took the minute. She sat with the cold weight of it. The exposure, the shame that was not hers but landed on her anyway, the sudden vivid awareness of exactly how she had started with Marcus and how that start looked from the outside and what it would mean now for Zoe, who was 7 and didn't go on Instagram but lived in a world that did. Then she picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered immediately. "I've seen it," he said before she could speak. His voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath it, and it was not nothing. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I already called my attorney," he said. "We're pursuing removal on the grounds of defamatory implication. I've also called 3 people who will make very clear, very quickly, that Giselle does not operate without consequences." A pause. "Naomi." "Don't apologize," she said. "Not yet. Not until I know something." "What do you need to know?" She gripped the phone. "How did she know?" she said. "How did Giselle know the way we met? Nobody knew the specifics except Sandra, and you, and me." A silence. "Marcus," she said. "I don't know," he said. And then before she could speak, "But I'm going to find out. Tonight." He found out by the next morning. It was not Sandra, whose discretion was beyond question, and it was an assistant, a young man named Trevor, who had processed paperwork related to Naomi's arrangement and had a secondary income Naomi suspected Marcus had not previously known about, selling peripheral information to a gossip consultant who worked with exactly the kind of people who used it the way Giselle had used it. Trevor was terminated by noon. Marcus's attorney had the post removed by 2 o'clock. By 4, Marcus was in Naomi's apartment, sitting across from her at the kitchen table with the look of a man who had fixed the problem and knew the problem was not the only thing that needed addressing. I exposed you to this, he said. The arrangement exposed me, she said. The arrangement was my structure, he said. My system, my failure to vet the people who had access to it. She looked at him. She had spent the last 12 hours making choices about how she was going to hold this, with blame or without, with the door open or closed. She had thought about Zoe. She had thought about who Marcus had been in the hospital waiting room, on the couch in the coffee shop in Inman Park. She had thought about the note in the amphibian book and his father who believed excess without purpose was a kind of poverty. You need to know something, she said. About me. He waited. I have never in my life been ashamed of what I did, she said. I would do it again. I would do anything for Zoe. But what I will not do, what I refuse to do, is spend the rest of my life having that moment used as a defining statement about who I am. I am not that arrangement. I am her mother. I am a woman who made a hard choice in a hard situation and came out the other side and somehow ended up, she stopped, gathered herself, ended up here, with you. And I need to know that who I am is safe with you, not protected. I don't need you to protect me. I need to know it's safe. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers. That same gesture, always deliberate, always chosen. There is nothing about you that is not safe with me, he said. Not your past, not your daughter, not the arrangement, not this conversation. None of it leaves this room except on your terms, and anyone who tries to use any piece of it as a weapon will find out exactly what I do with my resources when the thing I'm protecting matters to me. Naomi felt the thing inside her that had been braced since the morning she saw that post slowly, carefully relax. This matters to you, she said. Not a question. You matter to me, he said. Specifically, completely, in a way I did not budget for and cannot currently make sensible. She almost smiled. Can't make it sensible, I have tried, he said dryly. I am a man who runs a capital investment firm. I have models for everything. I have no model for this. She did smile then. It started small and grew, and she watched it do to him what it always did. That slight undoing, that shift in his composure. He looked at her like she was the variable that broke every equation he'd ever built, and he looked entirely at peace with it. Naomi, he said. Marcus, she said. I'm in love with you, he said. Quiet and plain, with the same directness he brought to everything else. No theater, no preamble, just the fact of it, placed between them like something real. The kitchen was completely quiet. Zoe was at Naomi's mother's for the weekend. Outside the window, Atlanta moved on, indifferent and alive. Inside it was just the two of them, and the thing he had said sitting in the air between them, solid and undeniable. Naomi looked at him. She thought about the night she had stood in a hotel hallway and breathed herself into steadiness before knocking on a stranger's door. She thought about the woman who had signed a document with a steady hand and told herself it was a transaction and survived it. She thought about that same woman sitting in a hospital waiting room while her daughter's heart was repaired and a man showing up with coffee from the right bakery because he had listened to her and remembered. She thought about every moment of the last 2 months and what they added up to, and what she wanted them to add up to. I know, she said softly. He looked at her. Naomi. I know because I feel it too, she said. And it terrifies me, and it is absolutely inconvenient, and it is the most real thing I have felt since Zoe was born, and I have no idea what to do with any of it. He was out of his chair before she finished the sentence, pulling her up and into him, and she went. She went with the full weight of herself, no armor, no calculation, just her hands on his chest and her face tipped up to his. He kissed her like the answer to a question both of them had been asking since that first night, deep and certain and unambiguous. His arms locked around her like he had finally stopped holding back, and she kissed him back the same way, like she had finally stopped surviving and started choosing. When they broke apart, his forehead was against hers, and they were both breathing unevenly, and she felt his hands, those careful, deliberate hands, move up her back like he was reminding himself she was real. What do we do now? She whispered. Whatever you want, he said, at whatever pace you want, on your terms. She pulled back just far enough to look at him. And what do you want? He looked at her steadily. Everything, he said. I want all of it. The complicated parts, the difficult parts, the parts that don't have a model. I want Saturday mornings with Zoe explaining frog taxonomy. I want you calling me instead of texting because you have something to say. I want the sweatshirt and the bare feet and the version of you that's not performing anything for anyone. He paused. I want the real thing, Naomi. That's all I want. She looked at this man. This entirely unexpected, entirely unprepared for man who had walked into her life through the most improbable door imaginable and had proceeded to dismantle every wall she had built with nothing more than honesty and presence and the particular way he said her name. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Okay, she said again, more certain. Let's do the real thing. He smiled. Not the almost smile, not the contained professional expression, the real one, the full one, the one that transformed his face and made him look like the Birmingham boy who had grown up believing that excess without purpose was a kind of poverty, who had built a machine and spent years trying to make it mean something, and had walked into a hotel room to find a woman in a burgundy dress who looked at him like something to get through and had decided on the spot that he wanted to be something else to her entirely. He kissed her again. She let him. She kissed him back. 3 months later, Naomi was standing in Marcus's kitchen. The kitchen of the house in Cascade Heights that he had bought 2 years ago and never quite made into a home, that was slowly, measurably, becoming one. Making coffee while Zoe sat on the counter beside her, eating cereal and telling Marcus, who was leaning against the island reading her the relevant section of the amphibian book, about the difference between a bullfrog and a leopard frog. Marcus was listening with his full and serious attention. He had not once in 3 months given Zoe anything less than his full and serious attention, and Naomi had stopped being surprised by it and started simply being grateful for it, which she understood was its own kind of transformation. She thought about the woman who had stood in a hotel hallway 6 months ago and breathed herself into steadiness. She thought about the word transaction and what she had believed it meant and what it had turned out to be instead. She poured 2 cups of coffee, set one on the counter near Marcus's hand. He looked up from the book and at her, that amber gaze, steady and warm and entirely, irrevocably hers. Thank you, he said quietly. She looked at him. For the coffee? For staying, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Outside, the morning was ordinary and Atlanta moved on as it always did. And in this kitchen, there was a 7-year-old on the counter explaining leopard frogs and a man with kind hands and honest eyes and the beginning, real and complicated and entirely unbudgeted for, of everything. Thank you for making it worth it, she said. Zoe looked between them with the unsentimental assessment of a child who has already decided she approves. You guys are being weird again, she announced. Marcus, can we get a frog? Marcus looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at Marcus. We'll discuss it, Marcus said seriously. That means yes, Zoe told her cereal. Naomi laughed. The real laugh, the one that reached her eyes, and Marcus watched it happen the way he always did, like it was something he was still not entirely used to and never intended to take for granted. She had walked into a transaction, and she had walked out of it into something she didn't have a word for yet, something that was still becoming, still unfolding, still surprising her at 7 a.m. in a kitchen that was slowly learning how to be a home. But she was not afraid, She had not been afraid for a while now. If you believe that love can find you in the most unexpected places, that one desperate decision can open a door to something real and lasting and entirely unplanned, then share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe for a new story every single day, and I will see you tomorrow.